Okay, I have 3 o'clock. You have 3 o'clock?
Yep.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining in to VCAP's educational webinar on responding to the COVID-19 crisis, ideas for vocational evaluators, career and assessment, transition assessment specialists. And go ahead to the next slide. We have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to go through, not too quickly, but go through everything. So just for the webinar, you're going to be muted throughout the webinar, all participants. Use the chat feature if you have any questions, if you want to share resources or have any comments. We know that we're not going to probably get to all of the questions or to be able to discuss all the resources during the webinar because we have about 135 or more signed up and we have a lot of material to cover, but we promise that we will address everything afterwards and share it with all participants. Closed captioning, as you can see, is available and it will be available in the recording also. Next. So we're going to discuss the current issues facing all of us, vocational evaluators, career and transition assessment specialists, trying to cover all of us. And you will see that we're covering education, voc rehab and private practice and community rehab programs. We're going to consider all the ethical issues when working and assessing individuals virtually, learn how career and transition assessment colleagues are providing online services, identify ways to complete transition assessments online, and you're going to be able to add to your toolbox with online tools, learn about accessibility tools and resources. Okay, so the standards, the VCAP standards co-chairpersons pulled together this VCAP statement on virtual delivery of services. I'm going to read it. I don't like to read slides, but I am going to read it because I think it's important enough to read it. It's going to be put on the website, on the VCAP website, and we will discuss throughout this webinar all the items that I'm going to be, or that are addressed in the statement on virtual delivery of services. So with COVID-19, it provides a unique challenge to a profession that takes pride in providing individualized services to meet the unique needs of each of the people we serve. That does not change during this challenging time. According to the VCAP Code of Ethics, our primary responsibility is to the individuals we serve. It may be possible to responsibly meet the needs of the individual while keeping the integrity of the vocational evaluation assessment process through virtual delivery of service. It should be recognized that virtual delivery of service might not be appropriate for all individuals. Next. So the following guidelines we're offering, VCAP is offering. Each practitioner is highly encouraged to take into account the individual's abilities, their comfort level with technology to be used, computer operation aptitude and capability, and case needs, access to accommodations or assistive devices. When making a decision on virtual service delivery, a collaborative conversation with all parties involved, so the client support system, significant others, if applicable, counselor, referral source, whoever's involved in that with that client, is beneficial to decide on the best path before moving forward with providing services virtually. And delivery of virtual services should be completed only through means that is HIPAA compliant to protect the confidential nature of the information shared. Screen sharing and virtual monitoring for the entirety of the session is necessary to ensure the individual is participating with undue assistance and that the session remains confidential. And you'll see a little bit more information about that in the difference of vocational assessment and education environment. Accommodations and/or assistive devices need to be provided to meet individual needs when and where appropriate to ensure optimal performance. When appropriate, additional in-person follow-up services should be provided when it is safe to do so. VE practitioners should follow the guidelines of the referral source or state, as well as assessment company telehealth guidelines, including those on copyright, when delivering services virtually. The client needs to feel fully comfortable with virtual service delivery. If the individual expresses discomfort or it is apparent that the virtual service delivery is not working, the practitioner should discuss discontinuing the session, continuing at another time that is agreeable to the individual, or continuing in an in-person format when available. So the panelists, there's 5 of us. You have Christina Eagle, who is a special education and transition education coordinator in Virginia. So she's got the education component. Sean Corbett is a certified vocational evaluator for vocational rehabilitation in Virginia. Amanda Hughes is a career exploration specialist for a private practice in Maryland. Bridget Green is an assistant professor of special education in Pennsylvania. And then I'm Lisa Blakeney, and I'm a certified vocational evaluator in private practice in Maryland.
So we were thinking of the current issues that are being that we all are experiencing in some way, shape, or form right now, and thinking about this push towards everything online. And when it comes to assessment, we have to ask ourselves: is this the best or most effective method for us as practitioners? But is this also the best and most effective method for the client? And how can we ensure that the responses are that of the client and not a participant, or I'm sorry, or not a parent or a significant other who may also be in the room? And we're going to start diving into what that looks like as we give assessments. So the APA, the American Psychological Association, came out with some principles to discuss what or to have us think about as practitioners, what we should think about when we disseminate online assessments or online testing, as they put it. Make a targeted effort to maintain the integrity and security of assessments. And what's essential when we think about maintaining integrity and security is understanding and looking at the client's needs. We all are familiar with computers to some degree, but we also know the value of our practice when we step away and perform assessments or tasks in a more traditional setting. We have to appreciate that our clients or students may not have that familiarity with technology or the access to technology. So it's important to begin to pay attention to our own personal limitations. How do you start feeling after you're being in front of the computer screen all day now? And start thinking about how that might be impacting our students or clients. For an assessment that might be an hour long on Zoom or on some sort of video platform, how hard that might be for some of our clients. Another recommendation is to consider the administration procedures as you would, follow them as you would in a traditional face-to-face setting. I know we had some questions regarding how to offer IQ tests or aptitude tests. And one of the recommendations that APA stated was to follow guidance and procedures of the test. And if there are any other questions, to reach out to APA or reach out to whomever is the author of that assessment to see how your changes may impact the validity or reliability of that assessment. Also, when we administer procedures, be sure that the video that your client has allows you to observe the performance. Oops, sorry, I'm still another. Yep. To allow you to observe the performance of your client and observe the environment your client is in, so that you can intervene if any outside participants are giving answers. We have to constantly assess our data quality. there's not a lot of research out there comparing traditional forms of assessment to online. And so this is what's making it so hard for online delivery of assessments, is because we don't know the valid way and most reliable way to give these online assessments. We have to, when we think about the data that we receive from these assessments, how did the administration of the assessment get impacted? We know that verbal conversations through video is not going to change part of the assessment process. However, how will a task that needs to be completed that focuses on manipulation or nonverbal tasks that rely on the individual to interact with the environment, how is that impacting the data that we receive that we need to make informed decisions based off of what we're observing? We have to make note that also some of the images we might show some of our clients based off of assessments may not be precise on their screens and may hinder the reliability of assessments. So if we rely on a pictorial career interest and they're using, and it looks great on our laptop or our PC, but they're using their iPhone to try and answer questions, and it's not set up to be used on an iPhone, it may hinder the accuracy of some of the data. As we all know, part of some of the aptitudes have in IQs have manipulatives as a subtest to support some of our students, and it's really not feasible or safe for us to continually go to the post office to send out a manipulative and then observe the individual using it and hope that the individual can send that manipulative back to us. So the APA recommended that we start looking at all of the subtests and see if there's specific subtests that we can use in lieu of. Maybe the example that they gave was the Wechsler's test of block design, because that would be very hard to give through a video platform. So their recommendation is to become very familiar with a variety of subtests, to start piecing together and really presenting what that client is capable of through a video platform. And finally, when you think about your conclusions, look at the confidence interval and look at the situational impact. We're all trying to navigate this pandemic, and it's very important that we pay attention to the confidence intervals, but we also make it clear, we clearly state it in the conclusions and the interpretation of our data, the impact that this may have. You can go to the next slide.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean. So I'm just going to talk about the ethical issues. Bridget very nicely talked about some of that stuff that we need to consider through the APA. But we also wanted to tell you that there are, we really need to follow our own ethics, whoever you're certified by. And so we'll take a look at VCAP. They're currently under review by the Ethics Committee. So hopefully that'll come out soon and you can use those as a guideline. The CVRP in Canada, that is the Certified Vocational Registered Professionals. They have their own set. So some people have become ICVEs, and so then they would follow that. Somebody like myself, who is a CRC and a CVE, we would follow the ethical codes under CRCC. And then there are federal mandates for kindergarten through 12th grade and the Council for Exceptional Children. So these are actually all links. So if you need to review the separate codes of ethics for any of these, that will be available to you later when we send the presentation out. But basically what we want to talk about are the main features. So respect for human rights and privacy. Everyone has the right to the protection of personal data concerning him or her. So, we know that, and we're going to talk about this later, that through some of these virtual platforms, we need to really be careful to make sure that they are following secure guidelines. One of the things we'll talk about later is the Zoom bombing. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about. And we certainly need to be careful of the integrity of the assessments and the situation in which we are evaluating our clients. So we just need to make sure that, we have a secure environment, that the Wi-Fi is secure and all that stuff. And we'll get into that a little bit more detail later. And then obviously we just want to do good to others. And, Bridget was talking about this too. We just want to promote the well-being of the client. We want to be fair. So, like she was talking about the confidence intervals, the standard error of measurement, making sure that we're reporting that out, and really in our reports, saying that, yes, we had to do this virtual assessment, and here are some things that may have come up and impacted their scores or what have you. So we just want to make sure that we're just providing appropriate services for everybody. Of course, do no harm, and be fair. We just want to provide and equalize opportunities the best we can. We know that it'll be difficult to have some accommodations that we might be able to handle better in person. And so we really want to make sure that if there are certain accommodations we cannot use, that we would maybe adjust the assessments we're giving or how we're doing them virtually. And of course, we're going to get into more detail, but I just wanted to really talk about, just really making sure that you're reading up on your code of ethics and following those to the T, because we don't want, people being assessed inappropriately and then given recommendations that may harm them or underrepresent them or anything like that. We just really want to do the best we can as practitioners in serving our consumers.
One of the most important things we have to realize that I think that's making our jobs so hard right now is that everything we do was designed with the intention to work with a person in a traditional or very physical environment where we can observe them interacting in a specific close proximity environment. But as we move forward to this online environment, given the situation we are in, be sure to have written permission from either a funding source and also the client or guardian. Consider that you have documentation, you have a paper trail that a parent and also your funding source is allowing you to do inventories. Find out, research in your company if you're allowed to give an evaluation, do a career exploration activities, or what type of services you can or cannot perform meaningfully in this specific online environment. Identify potential copyright issues. If we download an assessment or send an assessment via email to a potential client, that might compromise copyright issues, and we need to have the publisher's permission to send this out. So that's something to think about when we approach this through a very ethical lens. And as Sean mentioned earlier, identifying the appropriate assessments, tools, and methods of service that's appropriate for your client, not just to get assessments done, but we need to make sure we're getting data that's going to effectively reach our clients.
Before you pass on, Christine, on the next slide, I just want to add to that, with the written permission, as Bridget said, you have to have it. You need to make sure that to cover yourselves, that you have in writing, making sure that your referral source is okay with you doing it virtually, and the client, whether they're a youth, of course, if they're a minor, you need to get their a guardian. But if they're an adult, also, if you're providing services to adults, make sure that the permission, you have a release of information that you do, just add a line in there that the service is going to be provided virtually and they're in agreement to that. And then I know we've been receiving some information from different people over the past couple of weeks about the copyright issues, and um, you know, certain publishers, they're putting out some literature about it. Just make sure you read it carefully. I don't mean to think that you're not reading it carefully, but the wording, I know myself, I've had to read over it a couple of times from some publishers to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what they're saying. I don't think that they're going to say that you can provide any of their services or any of their assessment tools virtually without you purchasing something. So just make sure that you're double checking with everybody. And again, I would just get whatever you can in writing for it. And on the last item, I'm hearing from a lot of people that they're feeling like they have to change up everything that they're doing and make it all, like it be all online tools and assessments. It does not. You want to try to keep your services as close to what you're providing in a normal situation when you can. The only time that you should have to switch it is if it is something like dexterity, you know, that you're not going to be able to transfer or send to the client or have them do.
So on the topic of ethical issues, security and safety issues certainly comes into that discussion as well. So first, checking with your providers to see what platforms are recommended to use. I know here in the state of Maryland, the Division of Rehabilitation Services is no longer recommending Zoom as a platform because of the security issues that have come up recently. And so, you know, as a private practitioner, I'm now getting guidance from them to start using Google Hangouts or Skype or other platforms that have more secure platforms available. Things that are social media, Facebook and Instagram, those are strongly recommended not to be using for any kind of virtual service with clients. And permission slips, I know we've been talking about these already, but creating a permission slip that is specifically for the virtual format is recommended. It definitely is a different dynamic to do services in a virtual space. And so having those kinds of outlines in a permission slip that is specific to that is really recommended, just to be able to address the situation and have your client know what to expect up front. And then I'll pass it over to Sean to finish up this slide.
I mean, I think you did a great job. You know, we just have to, again, we said this earlier, but just make sure that if somebody doesn't have access to Wi-Fi, we don't want to just jump on unsecured or a free Wi-Fi. So we really want to make sure that everything is nice and secure, because otherwise other people can observe the data, or like we're going to talk about in the Zoom bombing, people can just kind of hack in and take over, which obviously we don't want. And there's a lot of personal information being given out in our vocational evaluations, and really just need to make sure that we're careful. And always having a password protected network. And, you know, like Amanda was saying, just make sure you don't share any of the videos anywhere. Let's look at the next slide. Yeah, so, you know, as I've been mentioning a couple of times, and only because this has come up a lot recently about the Zoom bombings, I know our agency as well has stopped using Zoom until they can figure out how to make it more secure. So Google Hangouts and other platforms are being used right now. But even those, you just want to make sure that, or like for Zoom, you want to require a password every time you create a virtual meeting. So, you know, like we did today, everybody had to register and then they were given a password to join in. You want to create a waiting room. Lock the meeting once the person enters, whether it's a student or a client. And then of course, don't record anything unless given, there's been permission given, and that they know you're not going to share it outside of the agency. Christine?
Can I add something real quick first, please? Just so you all know, we're talking about some of the issues with Zoom. We went back and forth last night and today about changing our platform, but didn't want to do it last minute. The other thing is make sure that whatever you're going to use, that you check it out and play with it first, because we're also hearing that some of those other platforms are dropping calls, or there's breaking up of connection and things like that. So just like with assessment tools, you have to do it first before you administer with a client. Make sure you're checking everything out.
And I think I work as a special education teacher and transition specialist for or coordinator in the public school system. And so with K through 12 students, there we have to go through and abide by FERPA. And so our district that I work in do not allow usage of many of the common platforms for video conferencing. So we have to use Microsoft Teams because that is compliant for our county. So if you're working in the school system or working with students who are still in the school system, that may be something that you want to consider as well. Also, just remember the entire world right now is online. So there's going to be hiccups and glitches and all of that kind of a thing, especially during those high traffic times. So during the work day and things like that, to just keep in mind.
Somebody had a good question. What would be our responsibility to store the recordings? So again, this is new. I don't have an answer to that except to check with, again, your referral source and making sure it's in a secure location, and maybe coming up with a time frame and sharing that with your referral source and client. Christina or anybody else, are there any guidelines for your?
I think it would also, I would defer to the guidelines of your referring agency or through your school system or whatever. We've had guidance on that, but that's our district's guidance. So I would refer to that. I would keep a log and documentation of each online meeting that you've had, so that is all recorded in terms of that. It's also important to just know, just being aware of the recording settings, because sometimes meetings can automatically be recorded, but you can change that within the settings. So just keep all of those things in mind and check that out on the various platforms that are available.
There's also a question about why would you need to record an assessment process. I think, again, that's going to depend on the requirements of your referral source. I do job exploration counseling for pre-ed students. We do not record. It's a learning, I think, a learning process for all of us going through this. So it's going to go back to who is referring the client, what are their requirements, and having a conversation with them on if they required it or not. I know, Christina, you said that the student can refuse to be recorded. Are you guys mandated to record all sessions that you have?
No. Okay. There's also a student has the right to not present video. So just because we have capability to have face-to-face on the video, that doesn't mean that that might be in the best interest of that student. So also you need to keep the ethics in mind with that, because you want to ensure that there's validity in the conversation that you're having with that individual, right? So when you can't see who it is. So there is a lot of, the other question that I was thinking of as you were speaking is, do you record individual meetings with students or clients in a regular setting? So those are all things to keep in mind in terms of that. And so I think having those conversations with the various agencies that you work with or school systems is really important.
We're not recommending, VCAP is not recommending that you record. We're just saying make sure that you're checking out with who your provider is, who your referral source is, to see if it's something that you would need to do.
One more thing I'd like to add is also if your provider or funding source does want you to record, also ask how long you should keep the recording before you purge it. And that keeps your computer and it keeps the client safe.
So we've been talking throughout, I mean, you're hearing what different evaluators are doing, different staff persons are doing. There's a lot of us that are, wearing multiple hats all the time in this field, but maybe even more now than ever, while everybody is trying to figure this out. So there are going to be different stipulations and requirements for teachers and transition coordinators, for vocational evaluators. Of course, students are having to, a lot of students are having to learn things and making sure that their needs are being met. And then it all depends on if you're a private company providing career assessment, vocational transition services, or if you're vocational rehab or any other entity. I know in Maryland right now, I get the primary, my primary referral source is from Voc Rehab. We are only allowed to provide virtual services for the job exploration counseling creates. That's it. We cannot provide career assessment services. We cannot do vocational evaluation. We are hoping that that's going to change, especially since none of us know how long this is going to go on. So it's definitely affecting a lot of clients. I know the number of clients that I've had to cancel over, because this has been since March 17th, where we were told that you cannot provide the services anymore. So it definitely depends on the state. I know Florida right now, at least one person we got information from, they're still able to provide vocational evaluation, pre-placement training, work readiness training, psychological evaluations, treatment, WIPA services, and self-employment in person, at a safe distance, or virtually. And I know Maryland, there's no in-person at all. Started out that way, but then quickly that changed. And then Virginia, Sean?
Yeah, so we're able to provide initial, I don't know why it's vocational interviews, interest inventories, and other career exploration activities. You know, we had Zoom originally, but now we're not using that. And we've been encouraged to use Google Hangouts, but we haven't had the best luck. The other problem is a lot of our evaluators, work with a set of consumers that may not have the internet, may not have any access to the internet or a camera or anything like that. So we just definitely try to get a hold of them by phone or sending interest inventories by mail. We have talked about the career exploration piece for pre-ETS, of course. And again, very much like a permission slip, just, sort of writing something up that says, because I know on our vocational informational form that we use, we typically ask the consumer how much help they got, whether or not, the parents just filled out the whole form themselves, if the client filled it out mostly, but then needed help for certain parts, or if they just filled it out themselves. So we did decide that we would write something like that up and send it along with the interest inventories to see how much assistance they were given, just so that we're aware once the assessments come back to us. We are trying to look into, we do have the Woodcock Johnson 4, and they have offered some components of it online. So we're, again, just trying to find a secure way to be able to do these assessments, and same thing with online career scope. And of course, a lot of people received the guidance from Pearson. So we're just trying to figure this out in a way that it's going to be ethical. We're not compromising the integrity of the assessments or the situation in which the consumers are taking these assessments. So we're just trying to take our time and be careful to make sure we're doing everything the right way.
We'd like others to share either in chat or email to the home office after the webinar, in other states, if you're able to provide, what services you're able to provide. I've spoken to a couple of people from Canada, and it sounds like you're able to still provide services, the services that you were. You're just trying to figure out how to do everything virtually, all the services. So again, it's going to depend on where you're from.
Sorry about that. I'm still on mute. Okay, so as a vocational evaluator, even if we are able to do virtual assessments, we do need to consider many implications. So obviously, we can't do some of the assessments because we can't, let's say work samples, for example, we couldn't, lug a work sample to somebody's house, have them sanitize it, and then try to call them later and observe them doing that, or like dexterity boards that Lisa was mentioning earlier. But even when you just think about how much observation we do, even during, an academic assessment or an aptitude assessment, we watch all those physical cues. Maybe they're tapping their pen, maybe they're shaking their legs, maybe they're anxious, or, other things that we're just constantly observing. It would be pretty challenging on a webcam to see all those nuances. So just keep that in mind, that there'll be a lot of those things that we might miss, especially, you can only really see my shoulders up. So you don't know what I'm doing, if I'm shaking, if I'm, maybe playing with a calculator that I'm not supposed to have, things like that. Or a cell phone, that's big for me, is you have to turn your cell phone off and put it away. But there's no way that I would know that, especially if this is all I can see in the camera. And there would obviously be difficulties evaluating and even implementing assistive technology. Again, I know a lot of us like to see how much math somebody can do without a calculator, and maybe then add in a calculator later. We wouldn't even be able to see how they're using a calculator. I know I pay very close attention to that, to see if they know how to use it, even just basic, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. These are a lot of the things that I think we've taken for granted throughout our years of practice, that, now that we would be confined to a virtual environment, we would be sorely missing.
And I think just one thing to add with that is, an in-person situation, you have not even just the things that you can see and observe, but also just other senses. So, is their hygiene okay? Do they put off an odor that might be offensive in a work environment? Do they have healthy teeth? There's different aspects to the person holistically that we can't really observe in a virtual format either, that also play into what we recommend for the outcome of assessing them. So just keeping in mind those other whole wellness factors is really important to consider too.
Right, absolutely. That was a great point, Amanda. I didn't even think about that, actually. And, one of my concerns too is, we have a lot of parents that want to help and be involved. And, as evaluators, we often have to say, I'm sorry, you can't come back with me. You'll have to wait here because I'm here to observe your son or daughter. And so with a virtual environment, we can't necessarily control if they're in the room or not, and we might not know either. So there's just a lot of things that we have to consider. We can certainly, I know I took an online class once through Nova Community College, and I had to take an exam online, and they had me actually take my web camera and move it around the room and show that I didn't have anything on my workspace. Nobody else was in the room. But then they were watching me to watch where my eyes were going, if I was moving, if I was talking, things like that, which obviously increased my anxiety. So not sure if they noticed that, but I think about that in terms of our consumers as well. It's just, knowing that somebody's on the other side of this camera just watching them, that maybe somebody that didn't have testing anxiety now does. These are just a lot of the things that we're going to need to consider.
I would also recommend with the items that you and Amanda were bringing up, that you make sure in the report that you're doing for a client that you're serving virtually, that you put in that these areas were not able to be assessed fully. The behavioral observations, the hygiene and grooming, some of the other work. I didn't think about that myself, so glad that came up.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. Yeah, somebody had said that they often found themselves on the speaker phone with the client and the parent when they thought maybe they were just going to speak to the client. So, even then, just doing the initial interview, they could be prompted, which might be okay, but that still takes away, because we need to see how much they can advocate for themselves, speak for themselves, know about themselves, so on and so forth.
And somebody brought up a good point that you're not going to be able to smell if somebody's maybe under the influence or using during the assessment process. So just realizing the limit, some of the limitations and what you're going to possibly miss.
Absolutely. Is this me still?
Oh, sorry, this is me.
Okay.
So we want to talk a little bit about thinking of it from the perspective of the student and client also. We talked a lot about external input, but one of the things I want us to think about also is just bandwidth and access to technology. I know that was a question that was brought up earlier. Some of our students or clients may not have access to computers or internet, and they may not have the bandwidth necessary to do a video conference call like this, like we're having today. I know with some of my students at Duquesne, they have live lectures, but their only access to the internet in their home environment is through their phone hotspot. And if they were to use that for one live class, it would take up all of their bandwidth, and then they would not, then they would have to find money to pay for to pay the bill and pay extra for more bandwidth access. And that's why we do some of the recording lectures in lessons, but it's really essential that we consider, access to technology. Some of our students or clients, the only access to internet might be through the library, and that's hindering in libraries being shut down, depending on your state. It's now hindering their ability to respond to us. If some families are still having our parents are losing jobs and they're trying to find money through unemployment, if they've had the luxury to get through all of that, but to pay all of the bills, and the phone bill might be one of the many bills that they have to negotiate what is being spent. So we have to consider all of those environmental stressors that are now occurring on their end. Furthermore, some of our clients are just not comfortable with online options. I know that I was working with one of my clients, and the thought of being watched through a computer screen was very triggering for his mental health needs, and he just couldn't do it. He just shut the computer and walked away. So we have to be cognizant of how this online option may act as an environmental trigger also. Furthermore, they're human beings just like we all are, and there's a curve of comfortable and a learning curve that we need to appreciate for a lot of our clients. The disability severity or severity of our clients' disabilities in AT may be impacted. As I mentioned, when we distribute some interest inventories, or we have an individual use our screen, we have to make sure that their assistive technology is accessible to our version of Adobe Reader. So that's very important that we're thinking about what roadblocks are already in the pathway that may hinder student or client participation. does the student have access to meaningful assistive technology or accommodations in their home environment? And I know Christina will talk more about accommodations as it relates to transition assessment later on in the presentation. Finally, one more point I want to add. I know that we probably all are seeing that Zoom allows you to have different backgrounds, and some video platforms are allowing people to have different backgrounds. And part of it's being used for humor, but I have seen that with some of my undergraduate and graduate students, part of it's used to block other people out from seeing the type of home they live in. And it's used as a protective measure for the student, but we also have to remember that if that's being done, we might not be able to see the interactions with the environment or the noise or the distractions in the environment. So we have to sort of navigate, how do we want to handle this situation, given that we want our client or student to feel as safe as possible, but yet this video or this background picture that makes them feel safe and in control is also lessening our ability to observe any environmental distractions.
So some recommendations for just moving forward. We've talked a lot about some of these points already, of just first and foremost, following the guidelines provided by your state, county funding source. You can't move forward unless you get the okay from these entities. If you're able to move forward, considering the client, I know we've been talking about this as well, but just consider, is this assessment a necessary thing to do in this moment right now, or is the mental health of your client more of the priority? Do they have physical needs that have to be met before doing an evaluation? So just kind of considering those things before moving forward as well. Assessing then if they're appropriate candidate, we've talked about that already. Checking with the publisher of the assessment to see if offered electronically, we've been touching on that as well. If all of these things are lining up and you're moving forward with virtual services, prepare beforehand. And a lot of what we've been talking about is that preparation piece of making sure that the assessments that you are doing are able to be delivered in a virtual format. I know with some of the documents that I use that I've created for the services, I've had to modify a little bit to make the directions more concrete in a virtual setting. So even if it's tools that you yourself have created and used, make sure that you're modifying them as you see fit. And then of course, discussing the virtual format with your client. So as soon as you enter into that meeting space with them, just having a check-in. Can you see me okay? Can you hear me okay? And just kind of agreeing upon how you're going to move forward with the meeting. I think it was Sean that was mentioning that you might have the client do some of the assessments beforehand. Is that going to be your style, or are you going to ask them to, just keep onto those documents you mailed beforehand to complete with you during the time that you have a virtual meeting? So discussing that ahead of time, making sure that the client understands what the format's going to be, and then also just how you're going to move through those activities. For myself, I've found it helpful that I work with students in high school, and so they'll snap a picture of their assessments they've completed, of their answers, and then just email me those attachments while we're in the meeting. So of course there's some of that wait time, but that's the way that has worked the best, of just being able to automatically and quickly see their responses that we could discuss and then move forward to the next thing. So making sure that your client is comfortable with whatever format you all discuss, and it's trial and error too. So of course you need to be flexible with how things might be changing. I know I got on a Zoom meeting with a client, and the client was having trouble getting on Zoom, so we just switched to Google Hangouts. So you have to also be adaptable to whatever the client's needs are, and be able to adapt to that in order to move forward. And also just mailing assessment tools, that's the method that I've been using as well. But of course there's online portals that a lot of publishers are able to use as well, where students will get access codes that you provide to them. So a variety of methods, but the biggest thing is just to prepare so that when you do have that virtual meeting, everything is squared away. And WinTAC especially has resources available on that link there that are more concrete that you can refer to later as well.
Christina, can you just like click on that just so people can see? We're not going to go over each one. And while you're doing that, I want to respond to a question someone had said. If someone asked if someone would require a translator, would that prevent them to be able to do the assessments, especially if they're strictly timed? And just with, you know, in person or not, with a translator, I think you're going to have to give that accommodation of extra time. And again, you record that in the report. And then the other thing is that for somebody who needs an interpreter, virtual might not be the best method for that. We lost the PowerPoint, Christina. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked you to switch. But you all will be able to see those links.
Yes, I will. We'll send out the PowerPoint. Let me pull back up the presentation in a minute.
But the example, and I'm glad somebody brought up that question of the interpreter, you're really going to have to decide, is this the right method for this client? Or should they just wait? Are they best, their needs best met by waiting until you can do it in person again?
I think another just important thing to note off of that is you might come into a situation where you are starting a virtual assessment and it's obvious that it's a format that's not appropriate. And I think it's perfectly fine to acknowledge that and end it and try to see if the client would be open to rescheduling for an in-person or for whatever other format at a later time. But just because you start a virtual service doesn't mean you have to power through it. I think it's perfectly fine and ethical for you to say, you acknowledge that it's not really working and just address it to troubleshoot how to move forward.
Sorry about that, folks.
Sorry. Okay.
All right, so we're on long term.
So obviously we're not 100% sure what the long-term impacts of all of this is going to be just yet, but what we do know is that this could potentially have a very long-term effect in what the field is going to look like in general for vocational evaluation in the future. With that in mind, you can be confident that the work you're doing to figure this out is valuable in that sense too. So it's a worthwhile thing to try to consider and figure out and critically think about. But what we do need to ensure is that we're not watering down or compromising our services as a result of the virtual format. It should try to mirror what your typical in-person services are, should be as closely as possible reflected in your virtual format. So we've talked about how work samples will be the most challenging in this regard, but what we should be doing is try to mimic it as much as possible, and maintaining that intensity of our work, maintaining the same level of challenge, that standard of integrity. But at the same token, just delivering out more assessments does not equate to continuing to have that same standard of rigor. We just need to be aware of the modifications we're doing and making sure that those are appropriate to make it the same or as closely the same as possible as what an in-person would be.
And somebody brought up about what about the jobs, what jobs will look like in the future. That's an excellent point, and we need to be aware of that when we're writing the reports. I know when I'm making recommendations, for jobs right now, well, depending on the job, there may not be any jobs available right now. So I think you need to make sure that you're putting some type of, statement in about that. And, we don't, again, because we don't know how long this is going to go on, we don't know how it's going to affect the recommendations that we're making based on how things are going to change in the future because of COVID-19.
I do think another really powerful thing about that one question in the chat box is that for a long time, the disability community has said that a lot of the jobs can be performed in an online format if given access to the required technology. And what we're seeing is that they were correct in that fight for the past 10 years. And we're seeing that now there's precedent that yes, all of the jobs can be done at home. We just need that push to ensure that they have the adequate resources needed to perform that task. And also if it is something that they would want to do, to stay in. We don't know how it's going to change. I know at my current job, there's already a push for admin to opt out of going to work every day, and they're to especially in the summers with the kiddos at home, to work from home on certain days. So I do think that question was something that we all have to keep in the back of our minds, because the landscape for recommendations of types of job might inherently change too.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about what are the things that we can be doing in the sense of moving forward while also staying at home. And I think that, first of all, it's providing realistic and manageable expectations of the work that we're doing, and what are the expectations of the outcomes of that work. Taking data on what we can, and also knowing that things may look a little bit different, and the outcomes might be not the same, but they're attended as well. Also, be confident you are an expert in your field. So it's really important to rely on your knowledge and your base. And then also reaching out to colleagues. So I wanted to also mention that now would be a great time to join VCAP if you're not already a member. There's lots of benefits to it. One of them is our case study group. We have educational webinars, a newsletter, lots of services that may be of help during this time and beyond. So I'm going to talk a little bit about transition assessment, because this is one of the things that definitely can be done during this time. And one of the things that I use this in terms of transition assessment in the work that I do, it's based off of George Tilson's positive personal profile. And it looks at these aspects of a client or a student, and gathers all of them in an inventory sense or interview. And so as we have talked a lot about the various components of parents being involved and families being involved, one way that we can talk about utilizing information from various sources, the student and those close to them, to gather different perspectives about these various parts of their personality, strengths, values, abilities, temperaments, etc. Some tools that could be used: ONET, My Next Move. One of the things that we use a lot, that I use with the teachers that I work with, is Virtual Job Shadow, which uses a lot of ONET's inventories to match careers to the individual, and they can watch videos of that career and state whether they like it and reflect upon it. Also, these are links to various toolkits, matrices that provide different transition assessments. Also, you may want to consider the copyright issue as you look through these assessments and tools.
Hey, Christina, I just want to add that the VCAP's community of practice that's on Facebook also has some tools that are listed on there.
Okay, awesome. So other tools that can be used, these are a list of just some various websites and services that might be of use. The Transition TN has a database of curriculum. Cognitopia is a way for individuals to track their goals with video. You can create task analysis, those type of thing. It focuses on self-determination skills. And also the College Board is a great resource as well. And, you know, learning about different careers. On this slide, there's a variety of supports. If I click the links, we're going to have to go through what we just went through. So we will gladly send it out. TTAC is a service in Virginia for the Department of Education, and they provide, it's a Google site, and it's a variety of resources to make technology more accessible. So I thought that was a great tool. The accessibility one is a great website of everything of like, how do I make a video? How do I make a PDF accessible and that you can write in? How can you make things read aloud? Those type of things. It's a wealth of information. The Corona Supports is a link to the Arc of Northern Virginia, which has some great social stories at the bottom about the virus and what is happening, which is a great support to our students, especially those who may need more visuals. And yes, we will email out a PDF of the presentation later today. And it takes a little bit of time for the video to process. So once that becomes available, we will also send that out as a recording. And also the Job Accommodation Network is a great resource in making recommendations about, you know, job accommodations, things like that. And we also, great plug, have a previous webinar from one of the leaders from Jan. So you might want to check that out as well. Tools for practice. So this link is about risk management for telepractice. Again, it's great to know sort of what are the risks are and how can we handle them up front. Again, you can join VCAP, and those are some of the services that we provide. All right, questions and comments. So there was a couple questions, let me pull them up, that were in the Q&A too.
Christina, I think I got all of those.
Oh, good for you.
And I was just looking at the questions. We received some questions from somebody that emailed. And some of the questions I think we've definitely addressed, but they're looking for ideas for academic testing and what may work best. Again, I think that's going to be what you like and if you're willing to send it. Again, here in Maryland, Amanda and I, we will mail out the packet ahead of time. Some people are, if you have limited booklets, you're not going to want to mail those out. So it's, something that you're going to have to kind of figure out, because you cannot just scan without permission from the publisher. You cannot just scan and email items. And this person also asked what options were available other than in person if the client does not have access to a computer or is not tech savvy. And I think we did talk about several of those. That, again, you're going to just need to work with them. It seems like the youth like to use their phones or maybe a tablet more than a computer. But again, just kind of working out with the individual what they're most comfortable with.
I see here too in the chat a couple more comments, questions of would love to hear what services are being offered for high school students and what is being sent out prior. So Lisa was touching on this a little bit of, so what we're mailing out, just Lisa and I serve individuals in high school for job exploration counseling. So for this particular service, we are not taking into account their academic abilities, their disability. We're not taking into account those things for the pre-employment transition services. So the only things that we're conducting in that service are job exploration activities. So temperaments, values, interests, so forth like that. So the things that we're mailing out to them prior are the different assessment tools in regards to those different areas that we use in person on a typical in-person session. So those are specific inventories that we're mailing them specifically, that we have copies of, that we've purchased from the publisher, mailing a packet of those things that we then do over a virtual meeting with them.
And I may have missed you saying this, Amanda, but the reason why we are not doing academic testing or aptitude testing with the pre-ETs, the transitioning youth, is because it's a federal mandate that we cannot assess their academics and aptitude. So,
right.
And in Virginia, we send out what's called a vocational informational form. It's something here in Northern Virginia, at least, that we developed to sort of guide the informational interview. But it gives us everything you could ever think of to ask the client. So we typically send that ahead of time anyways for our vocational evaluation, and use that as a good jumping off point. So that's something that we can still send out and then still meet with them on the phone or on a video chat to go over with them. Once they send it back, they can scan it, take pictures of it, mail it, whatever they want to do, and then we can use that. And then we do interest inventories as well, whether it's my next move or an SDS or something that we can mail to them ahead of time. But like I said earlier, Woodcock Johnson is the academic assessment that I know for sure has advertised that they will allow some of their parts to be done online. You just have to go through Riverside to check that out, but it of course will have a cost. So just make sure you're aware of that.
and somebody said, what do you do when the client says they have not received the packet sent out? That's where you come into being flexible, and you do postage with track, where you can track it to make sure, or send it, again, it's send it out again. It is costing more money, because you're sending postage, but you're being able to work, and you're being able to serve the client. So there's lots of different things that you're not thinking about that are coming into consideration for sure.
I want to touch base really quick on, and Christine, I think you and I can take this one, what services are being offered to high school students. Right now in the state of PA, we're really struggling with ensuring that the IEP is being met, accommodations and modifications are being met in online learning environment from traditional brick and mortar schools. And what we're seeing is that a lot of schools are taking attendance, but they're providing feedback on assignments. They're not grading assignments. And the reason why they're providing feedback and not grading is feedback allows the wiggle room of not having to fully implement all of the modifications in SDI. So the feedback is allowing the student to progress without the rigor of strict SDI, especially design instruction, being implemented in across all curricula. So that's one thing we have to be cognizant of. Also, a lot of what I've seen is occurring, and Christina can agree or disagree with me, but I'm seeing the focus of self-determination occurring right now, since academics being pulled back with the feedback only, and we can't really rely on our voc evaluator friends to help us out in our practice. So we're doing a lot of can't rely due to just constrictions of what we can offer, not that they're not being helpful. I want to be very clear on that. But so we're giving a lot of ways to promote self-advocacy skills, choices, self-determination skills that way. We're not really diving deep in the goals of internships or anything like that.
Something else that the one thing that happened with me and Marilyn, we're now having to also put a little cover sheet when we're mailing out the packet to the client, being very clear, even though it was in the email and via phone, it was very clear not to do any of the activities mailed to them ahead of time until we met virtually. But apparently they were an overachiever and started doing some of them ahead of time. So now we have a cover sheet that we send out. And somebody else had mentioned that some of the things you don't have to mail out, you can do through screen sharing. The one thing that we do, Amanda and I, we like after we finish, like, so in real, back in the old days when we could meet with people in person, after we met with them in person and we had them do all the activities, we would mail the packet with all the activities and the report to them, so that that student would have all their items that they have. So that's one reason why we go ahead and we're still mailing out the packet, because we'd be mailing it out to them at the end anyways. So somebody had asked about sharing permission slips. We'll send out we can share a couple of the permission slips that those of us, the panelists, use. Anybody else that wants to share, you can send to the home office at the vcapoffice@gmail.com. We will share all that was shared in the chats and questions. You'll get the PowerPoint and access to the recording also. Any other questions?
Just again, to manage expectations. The recording takes a while to process, so it won't be available right away. So it'll take maybe 24 hours or so till we can send it out.
And then just one more response to a question about the federal mandate that doesn't allow the achievement testing for pre-ETs. Is that just for career counseling exploration services or for VE and assessment? It's just for the pre-ETs, just for transitioning youth that fall under pre-ETs, that's all. Can somebody answer suggestions, experience?
Yeah, so I have not done discovery. However, there's a lot of parallels between George Tilson's work from Transcend in Maryland and the discovery process. So they're similar, but not the same. And I think it's, again, we can't go to the individual's home and visit them and get the whole sense of them in a holistic way, but we can gather the data that we have available. So gathering the information from the different people that engage with that person, things like that, making sure that you have permission slips for all of that, and releases, with that being said. So I do think that there are aspects of that in terms of discovery that can be done, but making sure it's done in a proper way.
All right, any last questions?
So in the chat, somebody asked about the federal mandate. I put a link to the latest update from the federal mandate in regards to special education. I don't know if that's what's governing the pre-ETs that Lisa was referring to, but that is in the PowerPoint.
I'll take a look at it, and if it isn't, we can send something else out too. All right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it very much. And if you have any further questions, just send them to the home office, please. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.